The blood-soaked leather vest clung to Wade Zimmerman's torso as he guided his exhausted mare through the moonlit Nevada desert. His destination, the small ranch house on the outskirts of Tonopah that had become his sanctuary over the past year. The bullet wound in his side throbbed mercilessly with each hoofbeat, reminding him that he'd narrowly escaped death at the hands of the ruthless Blackwater Gang earlier that night. The year was 1882, and in this corner of the West, justice still came from the barrel of a gun more often than a courtroom. Wade's vision blurred as his horse navigated the familiar path home. He'd been tracking the Blackwater Gang for weeks on behalf of the mining company that employed him as security. What should have been a routine surveillance mission had turned deadly when he was spotted. He managed to take down 2 of their men in the ensuing firefight, but not before catching a bullet himself. Dawn was breaking over the distant mountains when the small ranch house finally came into view. The modest structure stood as a testament to Wade's dreams of a different life, one he'd started building after years of drifting from town to town, taking whatever work his gun could earn him. The sight of smoke rising from the chimney told him Hannah White was already awake. His mare stopped at the hitching post without command, as if she too understood they had reached safety. Wade slid from the saddle, his boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. He clutched his side, feeling warm blood seeping between his fingers. The 20 yards to the front door stretched before him like miles. Hannah was stoking the fire when she heard the horse outside. At 26, she'd learned to be cautious, living alone on the edge of town. The shotgun was in her hands before the weak knock came at the door. She approached cautiously, sliding back the small viewing panel. "Wade," she gasped, immediately setting down the weapon and throwing open the door. He stood swaying in the doorframe, his face ghostly pale beneath the tan and trail dust. "Sorry to trouble you so early," he managed, attempting a smile that turned to a grimace. "My God," Hannah whispered, catching him as his knees buckled. Despite her slender frame, years of ranch work had made her strong enough to help guide his larger form to her bed in the corner of the main room. She'd known Wade for nearly a year, ever since he'd shown up in Tonopah looking for work with the Silver Peak Mining Company. As the local healer and midwife, Hannah had treated his occasional injuries, a cut here, a bruised rib there, nothing like this. Their friendship had grown slowly, built on quiet conversations when he'd come to town for supplies or stopped by with game from his hunting trips. "What happened?" she asked, already cutting away his blood-soaked shirt with practiced hands. "Blackwater Gang," he rasped. "They didn't take kindly to me watching their operation." Hannah's hands moved efficiently as she cleaned the wound. The bullet had gone through his side, missing vital organs but leaving him dangerously weak from blood loss. "You need to rest," she said firmly, pressing a clean bandage against the wound. "No moving until I say so." Wade tried to protest. "I can't stay. They might track me. You'd be in danger." Hannah's green eyes met his, fierce and determined. "You don't have to be strong tonight, Wade. Not here. Not with me." Those simple words broke something inside him, a dam he'd built long ago. In all his 32 years, no one had ever told Wade Zimmerman he could let his guard down. From his harsh childhood on a failing Kansas farm to his years as a cavalry scout and then a hired gun, strength was the only currency that mattered. "I don't know how not to be," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then I'll show you," she replied, her hand gentle on his forehead. "Sleep now. I'll keep watch." Wade wanted to protest further, but exhaustion and blood loss were taking their toll. His eyelids grew heavy as Hannah prepared a tea with herbs to fight infection and ease pain. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Hannah sitting by the window with his revolver across her lap, her silhouette outlined by the rising sun. Hannah watched Wade's chest rise and fall as he slept. She'd known men like him before, wanderers whose eyes carried the weight of too many hard years and hard choices. Her late father had been such a man, raising her alone after her mother died in childbirth. When fever took him 3 years ago, Hannah had continued their small healing practice, using the knowledge of herbs and remedies he'd taught her alongside what she'd learned from the local Shoshone people. She changed Wade's bandages throughout the day, noting with relief that the wound showed no signs of infection yet. By nightfall, his fever remained low, a good sign. She'd treated gunshot wounds before, but this one had come dangerously close to being fatal. A half-inch difference, and she would have found him dead on her doorstep instead of merely wounded. The thought troubled her more than it should. Wade was a client, a friend perhaps, but nothing more. She couldn't afford attachments in Tonopah, not when so many just passed through on their way to somewhere else. Still, as she dozed in the chair beside his bed, she found herself studying his features, the strong jaw now covered in dark stubble, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he'd once smiled more often. Wade stirred just before midnight, his eyes opening suddenly, hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "Easy," Hannah said softly. "You're safe." He relaxed slightly, recognition dawning. "How long have I been out?" "About 18 hours. You needed it." She helped him sit up enough to drink some broth. "The bullet went clean through. You were lucky." "Doesn't feel much like luck," he grimaced. "Better than the alternative," she countered. "Do you want to tell me what really happened out there?" "The Blackwater Gang doesn't usually venture this close to Tonopah." Wade sighed, accepting another spoonful of broth. "They've expanded their territory, taking over abandoned mines, using them to hide stolen silver shipments. The mining company hired me to find proof. And you found it. Enough to hang them all twice over. They're using the old Belmont shaft to store stolen ore before moving it south." He shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. They're planning to rob the bank here in town when the monthly payroll arrives next week." Hannah's eyes widened. "We need to tell Sheriff Parker." "Not yet," Wade said urgently, reaching for her arm. "There's someone feeding them information from inside the mining company. I need to figure out who before we move." "And how do you plan to do that when you can barely stand?" she challenged. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I hadn't quite worked that part out yet." Hannah shook her head. "First you heal, then we'll figure out the rest." "We?" he questioned, one eyebrow raised. "Yes, we," she replied firmly. "I'm already involved by harboring you. Besides, half my savings are in that bank." Wade studied her face, seeing the determination there. "You're not what I expected, Hannah White." "I get that a lot," she said dryly, adjusting his pillows. "Now rest. Morning comes early." As Wade drifted back to sleep, Hannah returned to her chair by the window, watching the starlit desert beyond. She'd lived in Tonopah her entire life, seen it grow from a dusty outpost to a budding silver town. This was her home, and she wouldn't see it terrorized by outlaws. But beyond that concern lay another. She was less willing to examine the worry that had gripped her heart when she'd opened the door to find Wade bleeding on her porch. The relief that had washed over her when she realized he would live. Feelings she had no business harboring for a man who, by his own admission, never stayed in one place for long. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. Wade grew stronger under Hannah's care, the color returning to his face, his appetite improving. Hannah continued her regular work, visiting patients in town and returning to check on Wade. To her surprise, he proved to be a model patient, following her instructions without the resistance she typically encountered from injured men. On the evening of the third day, Hannah returned from town with supplies and news. Wade was sitting up in a chair by the fire, his shirt unbuttoned while he changed his own bandages. "Let me," she said, setting down her basket and kneeling beside him. Her fingers brushed his skin as she examined the wound, feeling the heat of him against her fingertips. "It's healing well," she noted, trying to maintain professional distance despite their proximity. "You've been lucky with infections." "I've had good care," he replied, his voice low. Hannah busied herself with applying a fresh poultice, aware of his eyes on her face. "I heard something in town today," she said, changing the subject. "A stranger asking questions about a wounded man, describing you." Wade tensed under her hands. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. I wasn't the one they asked, but Mrs. Peabody at the general store mentioned it when I was buying supplies." Hannah secured the fresh bandage. "No one in town would connect you to me anyway. You've only been here a handful of times." "They'll keep looking," Wade said grimly. "I should leave before they find me here." Hannah stood, crossing her arms. "And go where exactly? You can barely ride yet." "I've managed with worse," he argued, though they both knew it wasn't true. The wound had been severe, and only now was he regaining his strength. "There's another option," Hannah said after a moment. "My father had a hunting cabin up in the hills. No one knows about it except me. You'd be safer there than trying to outrun them in your condition." Wade considered this. "When could we go?" "Tomorrow night. I need to gather supplies first." He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Hannah. I know this puts you at risk." She met his gaze steadily. "Some things are worth the risk." The unspoken weight of those words hung between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Hannah turned away first, moving to prepare their evening meal. As she worked, she found herself increasingly aware of Wade's presence in her small home, the sound of his breathing, the rustle of fabric as he moved, the weight of his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. That night, as had become their routine, Hannah took the bed while Wade insisted on sleeping in the chair by the fire, despite her protests that it would slow his healing. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the quiet night sounds, Hannah admitted to herself what she'd been trying to deny: she was falling for Wade Zimmerman, with all the complications that entailed. The realization didn't bring clarity, only more questions. Was she seeing the real man, or just the vulnerable version of him that injury had revealed? And even if what she felt was real, what future could there be with a man whose life was defined by chasing danger? As dawn approached, Hannah made her decision. She would help Wade recover and complete his mission against the Blackwater Gang because it was the right thing to do, but she would guard her heart. Tanapa was her home, and she had built a life here that mattered. She wouldn't abandon it for the uncertainty of loving a drifter, no matter how her heart protested. The journey to the cabin the following evening was slow and tense. They left after sunset, Wade riding Hannah's gentle bay gelding while she led the way on her mule, which carried their supplies. Every shadow seemed to hide potential danger, every distant sound causing them to pause and listen. The cabin was tucked away in a small valley, sheltered by pine trees that were rare in this part of Nevada. It was simple, just one room with a stone fireplace, a bed, a table, and some basic furnishings, but it had served as Hannah's father's retreat for years. "It's not much," Hannah said apologetically as she lit a lantern, illuminating the dusty interior. Wade looked around with appreciation. "It's perfect, defensible, hidden." He moved to the single window, checking the sight lines. "Your father chose well." Hannah smiled sadly, running her hand along the rough-hewn table. "He valued his privacy. After my mother died, he'd come up here when the memories became too much." Wade watched her, sensing there was more to the story. "You miss him." It wasn't a question, but Hannah nodded anyway, Every day, he taught me everything I know about healing, about standing on my own. He did a fine job, Wade said quietly. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Hannah White. She looked up, surprised by the admiration in his voice. I don't feel very strong most days, just stubborn. That's the best kind of strong. A smile touched his lips, transforming his features. The kind that endures. Hannah felt a flush creep up her neck and busied herself with unpacking their supplies. We should settle in. I'll need to return to town tomorrow to maintain appearances. You're taking a risk, coming and going, Wade pointed out. They might follow you. I've lived in these hills my whole life, she replied. I know ways even the local guides don't. Besides, it would raise more suspicion if I suddenly disappeared from town. Wade conceded with a nod, though concern still lined his face. What's your plan for discovering the informant? Hannah laid out her idea as she prepared a simple meal. The mining company's office clerk, Edwin Farrow, had been acting strangely lately, nervous, spending more than his salary should allow. She'd noticed when treating his wife's cough last week. I can get close enough to listen when the mine manager discusses the payroll delivery, she explained. People forget I'm there when they're sick or worried about someone who is. Wade listened, impressed by her observation skills but troubled by the risk. It's dangerous to get involved, Hannah. This is my town, she said firmly. These are my people. I won't stand by while they're threatened. He recognized the resolve in her voice, the same stubborn determination that had probably saved his life. All right, he agreed reluctantly, but we do this carefully. At the first sign of trouble, you pull back. Hannah nodded, though they both knew she had no intention of retreating if people needed her help. They ate in companionable silence, the tension of the journey fading into a different kind of awareness. The cabin's single room suddenly seemed very small, the reality of sharing such close quarters for days settling over them. I'll sleep by the fire, Wade offered, echoing their arrangement from Hannah's house. Don't be ridiculous, she replied practically. You're still healing and the nights are cold up here. The bed's big enough for both of us. At his raised eyebrow, she added, I trust you to be a gentleman, Wade Zimmerman. A flicker of something regret perhaps crossed his face. Always, he promised. That night, they lay side by side in the darkness, a respectable distance between them despite the narrow bed. Hannah was acutely aware of Wade's presence, the rhythm of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his body. Sleep eluded her, thoughts churning with the dangers ahead and the man beside her. Why did you help me? Wade asked suddenly, his voice low in the darkness. When I showed up at your door, you could have sent me to the doctor in town. Hannah considered her answer carefully. At first because you needed help, and that's what I do. Later. She paused, weighing honesty against prudence. Later because I wanted to. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken things. Wade's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers entwining with hers in a gesture that felt more intimate than any words. I'm not a good man, Hannah, he said finally. I've done things I'm not proud of. We all have regrets, she replied. But I've seen how you treat others, how you've chosen to use your skills to protect rather than harm. That tells me more about who you are than whatever past you're running from. Wade's grip tightened on her hand. I'm not running anymore, he said quietly. For the first time in my life, I'm thinking about staying somewhere, building something. The implication hung in the air between them, a fragile, tentative possibility neither was ready to name. Hannah's heart quickened, hope battling with caution. Before she could respond, Wade's breathing deepened, exhaustion claiming him. She lay awake much longer, his hand still in hers, wondering if the morning light would dispel this moment of vulnerability or strengthen it. The next week passed in a delicate dance of growing closeness and mounting danger. Hannah divided her time between town and the cabin, gathering information and tending to Wade's recovery. Each evening when she returned, she found him stronger, more like the capable man she'd glimpsed before his injury. He spent his days repairing the cabin, chopping wood, and planning their response to the Blackwater Gang's impending attack. Their nights were a careful negotiation of shared space and developing feelings. They talked for hours, Wade sharing stories of his travels across the West, Hannah recounting tales of growing up in Tanapa as it transformed from a dusty outpost to a silver boom town. Each revelation peeled away layers of reserve, building a connection that went beyond physical attraction. 5 days after they'd moved to the cabin, Hannah returned with crucial information. Edwin Farrow, the clerk she'd suspected, had been seen passing a note to a known associate of the Blackwater Gang. More importantly, she'd overheard the mine manager confirming that the payroll delivery would arrive on Friday, just 2 days away. They're planning to hit during the town's Founders' Day celebration, Hannah explained as they sat at the table reviewing Wade's hand-drawn map of Tanapa. Half the town will be gathered in the square, including most of Sheriff Parker's deputies. Wade nodded grimly. Smart. Create a distraction with lots of potential innocent bystanders while they hit the bank. He traced a route on the map. They'll likely come in from the south here, where the terrain provides cover. Can the sheriff stop them with warning, not alone, and not without knowing who to trust? Wade stood, testing his injured side. The wound was healing well, the pain reduced to a manageable ache. I need to get back into town, talk to some people I trust at the mining company. Hannah frowned. It's too dangerous. The Blackwater men are still looking for you. Which is why I'll go tomorrow night, Wade countered. Under cover of darkness through the back streets, I still have friends who'll help. The worry on Hannah's face was plain to see. Wade stepped closer, resting his hands lightly on her shoulders. I'll be careful, he promised. But we can't let them rob that bank. It's not just about the money. They've killed people during their holdups before. Hannah knew he was right, but the thought of him risking himself when barely recovered filled her with dread. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her palm. Promise me you'll come back. The simple gesture and earnest request undid the last of Wade's restraint. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing gently across her skin. I promise, he whispered before lowering his head to press his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When Hannah responded, rising on her toes to wrap her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more urgent, more honest than any words they'd shared. All the tension of the past days, the growing feelings neither had fully acknowledged, poured into that connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the moment you told me I didn't have to be strong, he admitted. Hannah smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. What took you so long, Cowboy? His answering laugh was interrupted by another kiss, this one initiated by Hannah. As the evening deepened around them, the threat of the coming days receded, replaced by the discovery of each other. They moved to the bed, their coming together both tender and passionate, a promise and a sanctuary in the face of uncertain future. Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath the rough blankets, Wade traced lazy patterns on Hannah's bare shoulder. When this is over, he said quietly, I want to stay, here in Tanapa, with you if you'll have me. Hannah raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes, searching for certainty. Are you sure? You've never stayed anywhere long. I've never had a reason to, he replied simply. Now I do. She kissed him again, sealing the promise between them. For the first time in years, Hannah allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the next day, the next patient. A future with Wade beside her, building something lasting together. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the reality of their situation. They spent the day preparing, Wade checking and cleaning his weapons, Hannah packing medical supplies they might need. The easy intimacy of the night before remained, but now layered with purpose and determination. As dusk approached, Wade prepared to leave for town. Hannah helped him secure his gun belt, her fingers lingering on the buckle. "Remember your promise," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Wade tilted her chin up, meeting her worried gaze. "I'll be back by dawn," he assured her, "and when this is over, we'll figure out what comes next together." With a last kiss, he mounted Hannah's bay gelding and disappeared into the gathering darkness. Hannah watched until she could no longer see him, then returned to the cabin to begin her own preparations. She wouldn't sit idly waiting for his return. She had her own role to play in what was coming. Wade made his way carefully down from the hills, using game trails and dry creek beds to avoid the main roads. His side ached with the exertion, but the wound held. Hannah's skilled care had worked wonders, though he suspected the motivation to return to her had accelerated his healing more than any medicine could. Tanapa was busy when he reached the outskirts, lanterns glowing as people prepared for the Founders' Day celebration. Wade skirted the main streets, keeping to shadows until he reached the small house behind the assayer's office where his friend William Taylor lived. Will had been Wade's contact at the mining company from the beginning, one of the few people he trusted completely. "You look better than expected for a dead man," Will remarked dryly after pulling Wade inside. "The Blackwater boys have been boasting they put you in the ground." "Let them keep thinking that," Wade replied, accepting the whiskey Will offered. "What's the situation?" Will filled him in on the details. The payroll delivery was confirmed for noon tomorrow, coming in on the regular stage from Carson City. 3 Blackwater Gang members had been spotted in town already, likely scouting for the main force that would arrive tomorrow. "And Pharaoh?" Wade asked. "You were right about him," Will confirmed. "Been passing information for weeks. Sheriff caught him trying to leave town this morning with a satchel full of cash. He confessed everything once they put the fear of God in him." This was both good and bad news. With Pharaoh in custody, they'd eliminated the inside man, but the Blackwater Gang would likely have a backup plan if their informant went silent. "Sheriff Parker's organizing a defense," Will continued, "but he's short-handed with the celebration tomorrow. Most of his deputies will be managing the crowds." Wade nodded thoughtfully. "The gang's counting on that. They'll hit during the height of the festivities when everyone's distracted." They spent the next hour planning, Wade drawing on his knowledge of the gang's tactics from tracking them these past months. By the time they finished, they had a strategy risky, but with a chance of success if they could get enough reliable men to help. "I'll round up some of the miners I trust," Will offered. "Men who can handle themselves in a fight." "Good. Position them around the bank and along the south road. Don't make it obvious we want the gang to commit to the robbery before we spring the trap." Wade checked his pocket watch. "I need to get back to Hannah before dawn." Will's eyebrows rose at the familiar way Wade spoke her name. "The healer woman, that where you've been hiding out," Wade met his friend's gaze steadily. "She saved my life, and when this is over, I'm hoping she'll agree to share it." Will whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned." Wade Zimmerman, settling down, "never thought I'd see the day." "Neither did I," Wade admitted, a smile tugging at his lips despite the gravity of their situation. "Life has a way of surprising you." After confirming final details for tomorrow, Wade slipped back into the night, taking a different route out of town as a precaution. The journey back to the cabin seemed longer, anxiety for what lay ahead mingling with eagerness to return to Hannah. It was the darkest hour before dawn when Wade approached the cabin. Something felt wrong immediately. The door stood slightly ajar, a lantern still burning inside despite the late hour. Drawing his revolver, Wade dismounted and approached cautiously. "Hannah," he called softly, pushing the door open with his foot. The cabin was empty, signs of a struggle evident in the overturned chair and scattered items. On the table lay a crude note, the handwriting barely legible. "We have the woman. Exchange yourself for her. Noon tomorrow at Sulphur Springs. Come alone or she dies." Cold fury washed over Wade, followed by crushing guilt. They must have followed Hannah during one of her trips to town. His carelessness had put her in danger. For a moment, he considered riding straight to Sulphur Springs, but reason prevailed. That was exactly what the Blackwater Gang wanted, to draw him away from town before their bank robbery. They'd use Hannah to neutralize him, then proceed with their plan unchallenged. He wouldn't let that happen. He needed help, and he needed a plan that would save Hannah and stop the robbery. His promise to her echoed in his mind. "When this is over, we'll figure out what comes next." Together, Wade rode hard back to Tanapa, reaching Will's house as the first light of dawn broke over the eastern mountains. Within the hour, they had assembled a small group of trusted men, miners, shopkeepers, and a couple of Sheriff Parker's most reliable deputies. The sheriff himself joined them, grim-faced when he learned of Hannah's abduction. "Miss White is well respected in this town," Parker said firmly. "We'll get her back." Their plan took shape quickly. The gang had inadvertently revealed their hand by choosing Sulphur Springs for the exchange. It was directly on the route they would need to escape after robbing the bank. They clearly intended to use Hannah as both bait for Wade and as insurance for their getaway. "They'll keep her alive until after the robbery," Wade reasoned. "They need her as leverage." "That gives us an advantage," Sheriff Parker agreed. "They won't expect us to split our forces." The strategy they devised was risky, but offered the best chance of success. Half their men would remain in town, positioned to defend the bank when the robbery was attempted. The other half, led by Wade, would set up at Sulphur Springs ahead of the meeting time, hidden among the rocks surrounding the natural basin. As they finalized details, Wade pulled Will aside. "If something happens to me," he said quietly, pressing a folded paper into his friend's hand, "give this to Hannah." Will nodded solemnly, tucking the note into his vest pocket. "You'll give it to her yourself," he replied. "I've never seen you miss a shot when it counted." Wade hoped his friend was right. The stakes had never been higher. The morning of Founders' Day dawned bright and clear. Townspeople began gathering in the square, unaware of the danger approaching or the drama about to unfold. Wade and his group left town separately to avoid attention, converging again on the trail to Sulphur Springs. The natural basin lay 2 miles south of town, ringed by rocky outcroppings that provided perfect cover for Wade's men. They positioned themselves by 11, settled in to wait. Wade found a spot with a clear view of the entire basin, his rifle ready. His side ached from the exertion, but adrenaline kept the pain at bay. As noon approached, Wade spotted movement at the southern entrance to the basin. 3 riders appeared, one leading a 4th horse carrying Hannah. Even at a distance, Wade could see she was bound but sitting upright, apparently unharmed. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by renewed focus. The leader of the small group was instantly recognizable: Jeremiah Blackwater himself, the notorious head of the gang. Wade had never seen him in person before, only descriptions from wanted posters. He was larger than Wade had imagined, with a distinctive black coat and hat that had given the gang its name. Blackwater brought the group to the center of the basin, then called out, "Zimmerman, I know you're here. Show yourself if you want the woman to live." Wade caught the eye of the deputy nearest him, giving the signal to hold position. Then, rifle in hand, he stood and stepped out from behind his cover. "Let her go, Blackwater," he called, moving slowly down the slope into the basin. "Your quarrels with me," Blackwater laughed, the sound echoing off the rocky walls. "That it is. You've been a thorn in my side for months, but business before pleasure." He gestured to one of his men, who roughly pulled Hannah from her horse. Wade continued his approach, stopping 30 yards from the group, close enough to shoot accurately, far enough to give his hidden men clear lines of fire. "What do you want?" "Simple exchange," Blackwater replied. "You for her. Then you and I take a little ride to settle our differences." The implication was clear. Wade wouldn't be returning from that ride. "Wade, don't," Hannah called, struggling against her captor. "It's a trap." The bank, her warning, was cut short by a backhanded slap from the man holding her. The sight of Hannah being struck ignited something primal in Wade. His finger tightened on the trigger, but he forced himself to wait. Rushing this would only put her in more danger. "No need for that," Wade said evenly, though his voice had dropped to a dangerous register. "I'll come with you. Just let her go first." Blackwater assessed him for a long moment, then nodded. "Reasonable enough. Release her," he ordered his man. The outlaw cut Hannah's bonds but kept a tight grip on her arm. Wade took a step forward and Hannah was pushed toward him. As they passed each other in the middle ground between the two groups, their eyes met briefly. Wade saw fear there, but also determination and trust. "When I say run, head for the rocks to your right," he murmured as they drew level. "Don't stop, don't look back." Hannah gave an almost imperceptible nod, continuing past him toward freedom. Wade kept walking toward Blackwater, counting steps, waiting for the perfect moment. When Hannah was just a few yards from the safety of the rocks, he made his move. "Now," he shouted, diving to the side as he brought up his rifle. Hannah sprinted for cover as Wade's first shot caught Blackwater's lieutenant in the chest. The basin erupted in gunfire as Wade's hidden men opened fire from the rocks. Blackwater and his remaining man returned fire, bullets kicking up dust around Wade as he rolled behind a boulder. The firefight was brief, but intense. When silence finally fell, Wade peered around his cover to see Blackwater's lieutenant and the other gang member lying motionless on the ground. Blackwater himself was nowhere to be seen. "Hannah," Wade called anxiously. "Here," she replied from behind a nearby outcropping. "I'm all right." Relief washed over him at the sound of her voice. He moved quickly to her position, checking her over for injuries. Aside from bruises on her wrists from the ropes and a reddened cheek from the slap, she appeared unharmed. Blackwater escaped, one of the deputies reported, joining them. "Slipped away during the confusion." "Headed for town, I'd bet," Wade said grimly. "The bank robbery was always the main objective," the deputy nodded. "Sheriff Parker's men should be ready for them." Wade helped Hannah to her feet, torn between staying with her and pursuing Blackwater. She read the conflict in his eyes and made the decision for him. "Go," she said firmly. "Stop them. I'll be fine with Deputy Miller here." "I'll bring her safely back to town," the deputy promised. Wade cupped Hannah's face gently, mindful of her bruised cheek. "This isn't over yet." "I know," she replied. "Be careful. I expect you to keep your promise about what comes after." He kissed her quickly, then mounted his horse. "Count on it," he said, before spurring the animal toward Tanapa. The ride back to town was a blur of dust and determination. Wade pushed his mount hard, knowing every minute counted. As he crested the final ridge overlooking Tanapa, He could see the Founders' Day celebration was in full swing in the town square. But his eyes were drawn to movement near the bank on the far side of town, several riders moving with purpose. Wade skirted the celebration, approaching from the north to avoid being spotted. As he drew closer to the bank, he could hear gunfire. The robbery was already in progress. He dismounted a block away, moving forward on foot with his rifle ready. The scene that greeted him was chaos. 3 bodies lay in the street outside the bank, 1 deputy and 2 outlaws. More gunfire came from inside the building. Wade spotted Sheriff Parker and 2 of his men taking cover behind an overturned wagon across from the bank entrance. "Sheriff," Wade called, darting forward to join them. "What's the situation?" "Blackwater and 4 men inside," Parker replied tersely. "They've got hostages, the bank manager and 2 clerks. Will and the others are covering the back exit." A bullet splintered the wood near Wade's head, driving him lower behind the wagon. "Any demands?" "Safe passage out of town," Parker said. "I've been stalling, waiting for reinforcements. Where's Hannah?" "Safe. Deputy Miller's bringing her in." Wade peered around the wagon at the bank entrance. "We need to get those hostages out." As if on cue, Blackwater's voice boomed from inside the bank. "Last chance, Sheriff. Clear the street or we start shooting hostages." Wade assessed their options quickly. "I can get to the side window," he offered. "Create a distraction while you move in the front." Parker nodded grimly. "Be careful." Blackwater's desperate now, and that makes him more dangerous. Wade moved off, using the adjacent buildings for cover as he worked his way to the side of the bank. A narrow window there would give him a view of the main floor. As he approached, he heard the commotion of the Founders' Day celebration. Suddenly, quieting word of the robbery had reached the town square. Peering carefully through the window, Wade could see inside the bank. Blackwater and 2 of his men had the hostages kneeling in the center of the floor, while the other 2 outlaws were stuffing money into saddlebags. Blackwater was agitated, pacing back and forth with his revolver in hand. Wade took careful aim through the window, waiting for the perfect moment. When one of the outlaws moved away from the hostages, Wade squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed inside the bank, catching the man in the shoulder. As planned, the distraction caused momentary chaos. In that instant, Sheriff Parker and his deputies stormed through the front door. The ensuing gunfight was brief but deadly. Wade fired twice more through the window, taking down another outlaw. When the smoke cleared, 3 of Blackwater's men lay dead or wounded. The 4th had surrendered. Blackwater himself was cornered behind the teller's counter, a gun to the bank manager's head. "It's over, Blackwater," Sheriff Parker called. "Let him go." "Not a chance," Blackwater snarled. "I'm walking out of here. Anyone tries to stop me, he dies first." Wade had worked his way to the bank's side door during the firefight. He now stood just inside, out of Blackwater's line of sight but with a clear view of the standoff. The outlaw leader was backing toward the rear exit, dragging the terrified bank manager with him. Time seemed to slow as Wade raised his rifle. The shot needed to be perfect. Any mistake would cost an innocent man his life. He drew a steady breath, focused past the pain in his side, past the fear for Hannah, past everything except the narrow space between the hostage's head and Blackwater's. His fingers squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the bank, followed by a moment of absolute silence. Then Blackwater crumpled to the floor, a single hole through his temple. The bank manager stumbled forward into Sheriff Parker's steadying grip. It was over. Wade lowered his rifle, suddenly aware of the exhaustion seeping into his bones. The wound in his side had reopened during the fighting, a warm wetness spreading beneath his shirt. But none of that mattered now. Hannah was safe. The town was safe. The future he'd barely dared to imagine might actually be possible. As he stepped fully into the bank's main room, the assembled lawmen turned to him with newfound respect. Sheriff Parker approached, extending his hand. "That was some shooting, Zimmerman," he said sincerely. "Tanapa owes you a debt." Wade shook the offered hand. "Just doing what needed doing, Sheriff." The bank door opened again, and Hannah rushed in, followed by Deputy Miller. Her eyes found Wade immediately, relief washing over her face when she saw him standing. She crossed to him quickly, mindful of the watching crowd but unable to restrain herself from touching his arm, reassuring herself he was truly all right. "You're bleeding again," she noted, seeing the stain spreading on his shirt. "It's nothing," Wade assured her, though the room had begun to spin slightly. "Just open the wound a bit." Hannah's expression told him she didn't believe that for a second. "Let's get you to my house so I can check it properly," she insisted, supporting him as he suddenly swayed. The adrenaline that had carried Wade through the confrontation was fading fast, leaving weakness in its wake. He allowed Hannah to guide him outside and onto her waiting wagon, vaguely aware of townspeople gathering, of congratulations being called out, of Sheriff Parker promising to handle the aftermath. The ride to Hannah's house passed in a blur of pain and encroaching darkness. Wade fought to stay conscious, focusing on Hannah's voice as she alternated between scolding him for overexerting himself and reassuring him that everything would be all right. By the time they reached her house, Wade could barely stand. Will and another miner helped get him inside and onto Hannah's bed. As Hannah cut away his blood-soaked shirt, revealing the reopened wound beneath, Wade finally surrendered to the darkness pulling at him. His last conscious thought was of Hannah's hands, steady and sure as they worked to save him once again. Wade drifted in and out of consciousness for the next day, aware sometimes of Hannah's presence, of cool cloths on his forehead, of gentle hands changing bandages. When he finally woke fully, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and Hannah was dozing in a chair beside the bed. He studied her in the golden light, the gentle curve of her cheek, the strand of dark hair that had escaped her usually neat bun, the slight frown that creased her brow even in sleep. In that moment, Wade knew with absolute certainty that he had found his home. "You're staring," Hannah murmured without opening her eyes. A smile tugged at Wade's lips. "Can you blame me?" Her eyes opened then, warm and relieved as they met his. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," he admitted, "but alive, thanks to you, again." Hannah moved to sit on the edge of the bed, checking his bandages with practiced hands. "The wound tore open pretty badly. You lost a lot of blood, but it's clean, no infection." Wade caught her hand in his. "How long was I out?" "About 30 hours. Her fingers tightened around his. "You had me worried." "Sorry about that," he said softly. "Seems I'm making a habit of stumbling home to you half dead." Hannah's expression softened at his choice of words. "Home." "As long as you keep stumbling home," she replied, "I can live with that." Wade tugged gently on her hand, drawing her down beside him. Despite his weakness, he wrapped an arm around her, kneading her close. "What happened after?" "With Blackwater's gang." Hannah settled against him, careful of his wounded side. "They rounded up the last of them yesterday." Will rode out with the sheriff to their hideout in the old mine. They recovered all the stolen silver and found evidence tying them to robberies across 3 territories. "Good," Wade said with satisfaction. "They won't be threatening anyone else." They lay in comfortable silence for a moment, the simple pleasure of being together, alive and safe enough for now. Then Hannah spoke again, her voice hesitant. "Will gave me your note, the one you wrote before going to Sulphur Springs." Wade tensed slightly. "You read it?" "Yes." She raised herself up to look into his eyes. Did you mean it? All of it. The note had been written in a moment of fear that he might not return a confession of feelings too new to speak aloud but too important to leave unsaid. In it, Wade had laid bare his heart, telling Hannah how she had changed him, how she had made him want things he'd never thought possible. A home, a future, love. Every word, he affirmed, meeting her gaze steadily. Hannah's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I never expected to find someone like you," she whispered. "I'd resigned myself to building a life alone." "You don't have to be alone anymore," Wade promised. "Neither of us does." He kissed her then, a gentle sealing of the promise between them. When they separated, Hannah rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beating of his heart. "The mining company sent a representative yesterday," she said after a while. "They're offering you a permanent position as head of security for their Nevada operations, based here in Tonopah." Wade considered this. Steady work, good pay, no more chasing outlaws across the territory. "Too boring for you?" Hannah asked, only half joking. Wade chuckled, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his wound. "After the past week, boring sounds perfect." He stroked her hair thoughtfully. "What about you? Would you be happy staying here in Tonopah?" "It's my home," she replied simply. "My practice is here. My patients need me. And I need you," Wade said softly. "Wherever you are, that's where I want to be." Hannah lifted her head to meet his gaze again, a smile illuminating her features. "Then it seems we have a plan." As sunlight filled the small house that would soon be theirs together, Wade pulled Hannah closer, grateful for the second chance he'd been given. He had ridden into Tonopah a solitary man, haunted by his past and uncertain of his future. He would stay as a man with purpose, with community, with love. The wound in his side would heal, leaving another scar to join the collection that mapped his years as a hired gun. But the wounds that had marked his soul, the loneliness, the restlessness, the belief that he always needed to be strong, those were healing too, under Hannah's gentle care. In the days that followed, as Wade regained his strength and they began planning their shared future, the town of Tonopah embraced him as one of their own. The quiet healer and the former gunman made an unlikely pair, but anyone who saw them together recognized the rightness of their match. Her steadiness balanced his intensity. His protective nature complemented her nurturing one. Their wedding took place that autumn, a simple ceremony in the town's small church, followed by a celebration that brought together miners, shopkeepers, ranchers, and even a few reformed outlaws Wade had known in his previous life. Hannah wore a dress of deep blue rather than traditional white, a choice that raised a few eyebrows but seemed perfectly fitting for a woman who had never followed convention. Will Taylor stood as Wade's best man, while Hannah's closest friend, the schoolteacher Eliza Reynolds, stood with her. Sheriff Parker himself gave the bride away, honoring the memory of Hannah's father and acknowledging her place in the community that had become her family after his passing. As they spoke their vows, Wade thought of that dawn when he had stumbled to Hannah's door, bleeding and desperate. "You don't have to be strong tonight," she had told him then, offering a gift he hadn't known how to accept. Now, standing before her and their community, Wade finally understood the true strength in vulnerability, in letting someone else carry your burden sometimes, in building a life where you didn't always have to face the world alone. The mining company provided them with a larger house on the edge of town, close enough for Hannah to continue her healing practice, but with room for a proper garden and perhaps, someday, children. Wade took to his new role with unexpected satisfaction, finding fulfillment in preventing trouble rather than reacting to it. The skills that had once made him a feared gunman now made him a respected lawman and protector. Together, They built a life rich in purpose and connection. When Hannah discovered she was expecting their first child the following spring, Wade's joy was tempered only by a momentary fear that he wouldn't know how to be a father, having never had a proper example himself. "You'll learn," Hannah assured him, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We both will." Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born that winter, followed 2 years later by a son they named James, after Hannah's father. The children grew strong and happy, surrounded by the love of their parents and the extended family of the town that had brought Wade and Hannah together. As the years passed, Tanapa grew and changed with the fortunes of the silver mines, but the foundations Wade and Hannah had built remained steady. Their home became known as a place of welcome and healing, not only for those seeking Hannah's medical skills, but for anyone needing refuge or a second chance, much as Wade himself had once needed. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Wade and Hannah would sit on their porch watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. In those peaceful moments, Wade would remember the man he had been, always moving, always alone, always believing that strength meant never showing weakness or need. "What are you thinking about?" Hannah would sometimes ask, reading the contemplation in his silence. And Wade would simply take her hand, grateful beyond words for the twist of fate that had brought him, wounded and desperate, to her door at dawn. For the words she had spoken that changed everything. "You don't have to be strong tonight." Because, in finding the courage to be vulnerable, he had discovered a strength greater than any he had known before, the strength that comes from being truly known and truly loved. The strength of home.